He helped an injured female horse. Then the next day, she brought her whole herd. The summer sun beat down on the dusty trail as Sam Thornton guided his wagon toward his small homestead on the edge of the Nebraska plains. After 3 days in town, selling his modest wheat harvest, all he wanted was to wash the road dust from his face and sleep in his own bed. The year was 1882, and Sam had been working his 100 acres for nearly 5 years now. It wasn't much, just a simple sod house, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, and fields that yielded enough to keep him fed with a little extra to sell. He didn't have a family, unless you counted his old mule Jasper and the barn cat who'd never bothered to stick around long enough to earn a name. Sam was about 2 miles from home when he spotted something unusual off the side of the trail. A flash of russet brown against the golden prairie grass, and a sound that made his chest tighten, the distressed whinny of a horse in trouble. "Whoa, Jasper!" Sam called, pulling on the reins. The mule snorted but obliged, and Sam climbed down from the wagon seat, his boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle whatever animal was out there. As he crested a small rise, his breath caught. There, tangled in a mess of old barbed wire that some careless rancher must have left behind, was a wild mare. She was beautiful, a bay with a coat that shone like polished copper in the afternoon light. Her mane was long and wild, the color of dark chocolate, and her eyes were wide with fear and pain. The wire had caught her rear leg and wrapped around her barrel, cutting into her flesh in several places. Blood matted her coat, and she trembled with exhaustion. "Easy now, girl," Sam said softly, keeping his voice low and steady. "Easy, I'm going to help you." The mare's ears flicked toward him, and she tried to lunge away, but the wire held her fast. She whinnied again, this time a sound so full of desperation that Sam felt it in his bones. He'd always had a way with animals. His father used to say he could whisper sense into a spooked stallion, or coax a frightened barn owl right into his hands. Moving slowly, Sam kept talking to the mare, letting her hear the calm in his voice, even if she couldn't understand the words. "That's it. I know you're scared, I know it hurts, but I promise you, I'm going to get you out of this mess." It took him nearly 20 minutes to get close enough to touch her. His heart broke as he saw the damage up close, deep cuts, some already swelling with infection, and the way she couldn't put weight on her back leg. This mare should have been running free with her herd, not trapped and suffering because of human carelessness. Sam returned to his wagon and retrieved his wire cutters, a canteen of water, and an old clean shirt he kept for emergencies. Then he began the painstaking work of freeing her. "I know, girl, I know," he murmured each time she flinched. "Just a little more now." The sun had moved considerably across the sky by the time Sam cut through the last strand of wire. The mare stood there shaking, too exhausted to run even though she was finally free. Sam carefully pulled the wire away from her wounds, wincing at each place where the barbs had bitten deep. "Let me clean these for you," he said, dampening his shirt with water from the canteen. "It'll sting, but it'll help." The mare's liquid brown eyes watched him as he gently cleaned each wound. She flinched but didn't pull away, as if she understood that this human, at least, meant her no harm. Sam worked with the patience of a man who'd learned that the best things in life couldn't be rushed. When he finished, he tore his shirt into strips and wrapped the worst of the wounds. "There now, that's the best I can do out here. You should rest a bit before you try to walk." But as soon as the words left his mouth, a chorus of whinnies rose from somewhere beyond the next hill. The mare's head shot up, and she answered with a call that sounded like both greeting and reassurance. "Your family's looking for you, are they?" Sam smiled. "Go on then, but take it easy on that leg." The mare turned her head to look at him fully for the first time. In her eyes, Sam saw something he couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. She took a tentative step, then another. Though she limped badly, she could walk. With one last look at Sam, she hobbled toward the sound of her herd. Sam watched until she disappeared over the hill, then gathered his tools and climbed back onto his wagon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. As Jasper plodded homeward, Sam thought about the mare and hoped she'd heal quickly. Wild things needed to be wild, and that horse needed to run. The next morning, Sam woke to an unusual sound, dozens of horses whinnying and the thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth. He stumbled out of bed, still in his long underwear, and peered through the window of his sod house. What he saw made him rub his eyes and look again. In the clearing between his house and barn stood a herd of wild horses. He counted quickly, 23 in all. There were pintos and palominos, blacks and greys, chestnuts and bays, and at the front of the group, watching his door with those same intelligent eyes, was the mare he'd helped yesterday. "Well, I'll be," Sam breathed. He pulled on his trousers and boots and stepped outside slowly, not wanting to spook them. The horses shifted and stamped but didn't run. The mare nickered softly and took a few steps toward him, still favoring her injured leg, but moving with more confidence than yesterday. "You brought your friends, did you?" Sam said, wonder coloring his voice. The mare tossed her head as if in agreement. Behind her, the herd watched. A magnificent stallion with a black coat that gleamed like midnight, several mares with foals pressed close to their sides, young horses just losing their gangly adolescent proportions. They all looked at Sam with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. Then the mare did something that made Sam's heart nearly stop. She walked right up to him and lowered her head, pressing her soft muzzle against his chest. It was a gesture of trust, so profound that Sam felt tears prick his eyes. "You're welcome, girl," he whispered, raising one hand to gently stroke her neck. "You're very welcome." For several long minutes, the man and the mare stood there while the herd watched. Then, as if some silent signal had passed between them, the horses began to move. But they didn't leave. Instead, they spread out across Sam's property, grazing on the prairie grass that grew tall around his fields. The black stallion approached next, more cautious than the mare, but clearly curious. He sniffed at Sam's outstretched hand, then snorted and tossed his magnificent head. Sam couldn't help but laugh. "You're a proud one, aren't you? That's all right. A stallion should have pride." Over the next hour, Sam simply sat on his porch step and watched the horses. They grazed peacefully, the foals playing and racing in circles while their mothers kept watchful eyes on them. It was like having a piece of the wild prairie right in his dooryard. When he finally stood to do his morning chores, the horses paid him no mind. He fed Jasper, who seemed utterly unconcerned about having 24 wild horses for neighbors, and then headed to his well to draw water. As he worked the pump, several of the horses approached, drawn by the sound and smell of water. "Thirsty, are you?" Sam said. "Well, there's plenty for everyone." He filled his trough, then his spare buckets, then a basin he used for washing clothes. The horses drank gratefully, and Sam found himself filling containers again and again until the whole herd had their fill. As the day wore on, an understanding seemed to form. The horses showed no sign of leaving, and Sam found he didn't want them to. They stayed clear of his small wheat field, but grazed contentedly on the surrounding grassland. The foals explored every corner of the property, their mothers always close behind. The stallion positioned himself on a small rise where he could keep watch over his family. Sam went about his work, mending a fence, weeding his vegetable garden, organizing his barn, but he did it all with a sense of joy he hadn't felt in years. The homestead felt alive in a way it never had before. Even Jasper seemed perkier, occasionally braying conversationally at the nearest horses. That evening, as Sam sat on his porch with a simple dinner of bread and stew, the mare approached again. She'd been resting for most of the day, and Sam was pleased to see she was putting slightly more weight on her injured leg. She stopped a few feet from the porch, and Sam had the distinct impression she was checking on him the same way he'd been keeping an eye on her. "I'm fine, girl," he said softly. "Better than fine, actually." It's been a long time since this place felt like anything more than just somewhere to sleep. The mare's ears flicked forward, and she took another step closer. Then, in a gesture that Sam would remember for the rest of his life, she carefully folded her front legs and lay down right there at the base of his porch steps. Sam set down his bowl. "You're going to stay close tonight, are you?" "Well, I can't say I mind the company." As the sun set over the Nebraska plains, Sam sat on his porch with a wild mare resting at his feet and a herd of wild horses dotting his land like living sculptures in the fading light. The prairie wind carried the scent of grass and freedom, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to the rising moon. The horses stayed for 3 days. During that time, Sam fell into a rhythm with them. Each morning, he'd provide fresh water, and the horses would graze peacefully around his property. He noticed that they were careful. They didn't trample his garden or damage his fences. It was as if they understood that this was his home and treated it with respect. The mare's wounds healed visibly day by day. Sam changed her makeshift bandages and applied a healing salve he made from herbs in his garden. She stood patiently for these treatments, occasionally nuzzling his shoulder as if in thanks. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Sam was surprised by a visitor. His nearest neighbor, a gruff cattle rancher named Pete Hargrove, rode up on his spotted gelding and stopped short at the sight of the wild herd. "Sam Thornton, what in tarnation is going on here?" Pete called out, his weathered face creased with confusion. Sam walked over, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Morning, Pete. They're just visiting." "Visiting?" Pete sputtered. "They're wild horses, a whole blamed herd of 'em." "I know what they are," Sam said calmly. "Found one of their mares caught in barbed wire a few days back. Helped her out. Next morning she brought the whole family by." Pete stared at him as if he'd sprouted a second head. "And you're just letting them stay? They're not hurting anything. Besides, they'll leave when they're ready." "Sam, these are valuable animals. You could round 'em up, break 'em, sell 'em, make more money than you'd see in 5 years of farming wheat." Sam's jaw tightened. He looked across his property at the herd, at the foals playing, at the mares grazing peacefully, at the proud stallion keeping watch, at his mare resting in a patch of shade. "These horses trusted me enough to come here, Pete. I won't betray that trust, not for any amount of money." Pete shook his head. "You're too soft-hearted, Sam. That's always been your problem." But there was something in the older man's eyes that looked almost like respect. "Just don't come crying to me when they eat you out of house and home." After Pete left, Sam stood for a long time, thinking about what he'd said. The truth was, he could use the money. His harvest had been modest, winter was coming, and his reserves were low. But every time he looked at the mare, at the trust in her eyes, he knew he'd made the right choice. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the mare approached Sam one last time. Her wounds had healed enough that she barely limped now. She pressed her forehead against his chest, and Sam wrapped his arms around her neck. "You need to go, don't you?" he whispered. "Your leg's better. It's time to run again." The mare nickered softly, then stepped back. She raised her head and called to her herd. The stallion answered, and one by one the horses began to gather. The foals were called to their mothers' sides. The younger horses formed up with practiced ease. Sam watched as they prepared to leave, his heart full of an emotion he couldn't quite name. Sadness and joy mixed together. The mare was the last to join the herd. She looked back at Sam one final time, and he could have sworn she nodded. Then, with the stallion leading the way, the herd began to move. They didn't run. They started at a walk, almost ceremonial in their departure. But as they reached the open prairie beyond Sam's property, the stallion broke into a trot, then a canter, then finally the full gallop that wild horses were born for. Sam stood on his porch and watched, until they were nothing but distant specks against the darkening sky, until even the sound of their hooves faded into the evening. Then he sat down on his steps Jasper coming to stand beside him with unusual solidarity, and he smiled. His property seemed emptier now, quieter. But Sam didn't feel lonely. He felt blessed. For 3 days, he'd been trusted by wild things. He'd been deemed worthy of their presence, their vulnerability, their gratitude. Some folks might measure wealth in gold or cattle, but Sam knew he'd been given something far more precious. As the first stars appeared in the vast Nebraska sky, Sam went inside his simple sod house. Tomorrow, he'd return to his regular work, the endless cycle of planting and harvesting, mending and making do. But tonight, he'd rest easy, knowing that somewhere out on the prairie, a herd of wild horses ran free, and among them was a bay mare who'd remember the man who'd helped her without asking for anything in return. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.